Hello, and welcome to Very Kimberly, the healed side of codependency. So, was my development of codependency the result of me being raised by parents who had learning disabilities? No. See, that mindset would have been there regardless of my parents' developmental abilities because both of them were raised in dysfunctional environments. What you have to remember is that codependency, as well as other mental health issues deriving from family dysfunction, is a generational stronghold. And generational strongholds don't discriminate. As a matter of fact, people who have developmental disabilities are probably more vulnerable to accepting and passing down dysfunctional mindsets because it compounds the struggles they already have navigating and functioning in a world that learns things and thinks about things differently. They're more vulnerable because they've been told that they are different from everyone else. So that desire to quote unquote fit in and adopting that codependent mindset as a lifestyle becomes a means of surviving in a world that tells them that they don't really belong. However, I do believe me being emotionally parentified as a child did add fuel to that already kindling fire. What you should also keep in mind is the fact that therapeutic support for families like mine was not a thing back in the 1980s. And even if it did exist back then, it wasn't available because of a broken system that, in my opinion, is still very much broken. But back to my story. Grandma Helen was a very big part of my life as a young child. By the time that I was born, Grandma Helen had already overcome many health battles like breast cancer that had spread into her brain, causing a tumor, as well as ovarian cancer. See, I inherited the BRCA1 gene for breast and ovarian cancer from her. But the removal of the brain tumor left Grandma Helen paralyzed on her left side. I remember her having to wear a brace on her foot and lower leg, and her left arm was swollen in a sling-like brace as well. I was Grandma Helen's very first granddaughter, and her pride and joy. I remember her always brushing my hair, telling me that she'd always wanted a daughter. And I believe in a way I was filling that void for her. Looking back, though, I question if that was really healthy for her or me. But despite what most people would consider limitations, Grandma Helen was determined to continue living and functioning. She continued to cook, clean, and do laundry, and she even taught me how to tie my shoes using only one functional hand. In other words, her physical limitations were not going to stop her from anything she set her mind to do. Grandma Helen was the matriarch of the entire family, making sure that everyone was doing what they were supposed to do and had what they needed. The dark side of these good qualities, however, was the fact that Grandma Helen could also be controlling. And she became very upset when her manipulation of that image she so desperately wanted to maintain didn't line up accordingly. Her and my mom talked on the phone every single day. So her voice, her opinions, and her values were very much guiding mom and dad as parents. As a matter of fact, Grandma Helen was the only one guiding my parents. And in many ways, despite her controlling nature, I believe that her influence was positive, at least for me, because more of my needs were being met by her, either directly or indirectly. But Grandma Helen passed away when I was 8 years old. And everything changed after that. My parents no longer had that voice telling them what to do, when to do it, or how to do it. And Grandpap Clyde had no desire to fill those shoes. Grandpap Clyde was a very hardworking, yet very reserved man. In his mind, his role was to provide, to take care of the yard, to take out the trash, etc. He helped my dad a lot, I believe because they were both men. But when it came to children, Grandpap Clyde felt that really wasn't his department, so to speak. And it wasn't much later, after Grandma Helen died, that my mom's health started to decline too. Mom had her first battle with pneumonia within that same year and had to be hospitalized for a short time. This is when I believe my big girl identity evolved into a full-blown little adult. I became particularly protective and somewhat controlling over my little sister Diana. I tried to correct Diana when she misbehaved, filling in that invisible second mom role that Grandma Helen and Mom portrayed when I was very young. But I was told by my parents, quote, "She doesn't understand, just let her go," or, quote, "Don't correct her, you're not her parent." So, for me as a developing child, this was all very confusing because I wanted to help Diana the same way that Grandma Helen had helped me. Now remember that Grandma Helen struggled to see her own worth and value as a person outside of how others saw her. And her worth and identity was also wrapped up in her matriarchy of our family. So, because I looked up to her, almost idolizing her when I was a young child, I believe in a way I was trying to become like her. And in many ways, I did, both good and bad. But to add to this chaos in my child mind even further, my parents chose to simply just allow Diana to do whatever she wanted without any type of healthy boundaries, structure, or discipline, because Grandma's voice wasn't there to guide them in that. No one was there to guide them as adults with mild learning disabilities on how to raise a child with severe learning disabilities. And as for me, a child with absolutely no diagnosed disabilities, well, now I had to figure all that out on my own without Grandma Helen. What was especially hard for me to process during this time in my childhood was the fact that my sister and I were treated by my parents much differently. I was being held to the standard of always being this perfect little girl, where things like boundaries, structure, and discipline were very strictly enforced. But it was the complete opposite with my sister because of her disability. I've been told that it was a very similar scenario with my dad and Uncle David, with David having to maintain this perfect image, compensating for whatever they deemed Dad unable to achieve. But for me, this parenting imbalance made me feel as if I wasn't just different from my family, but that I was also less loved and less valued. And when a child feels less loved and less valued by their parents, that child will ultimately start believing that there is something inherently wrong with them, and any form of developing self-esteem becomes destroyed, especially when they've been raised to believe that how others think, feel, or treat them is the only evidence of self-worth. I hope that you'll join me next time, and until then, this is Very Kimberly encouraging you to keep striving to be on the healed side of codependency.